You know that? That right there is a real good skeleton. You see, the way my brain works, in my mind there are 2 rooms filled to the brim with completely useless information. In one room, there's nothing but political theory, cultural precepts, and an account of the movements and actions of humanity. In the other, there's a whole lot of dumb nerd stuff. Which is why I really like museums. History and dumb nerd stuff mushed together. I love museums so much, I actually used to work in one. Not only do I have a degree in history, but I also have multiple years experience working in a museum environment. Now that I've waved some credentials in your face, let's discuss video games. Sometimes museums actually exist in video games, which is always an interesting scenario for me. Sometimes the museum will be part of the storyline, but just as often video game museums serve as a kind of set dressing. Video games usually have their own history and lore that needs to be imparted, and a museum can serve as a handy info dump. A physical representation of an in-game codex or optional log entries. Sometimes that can be easily skipped over by some players, but others are going to love digging into details that such a thing like that can reveal. Which means we should probably make sure that these museums are up to snuff. That's why today I'm going to be judging the quality of video game museums, starting by focusing on the Pewter Museum of Science from Pokémon. Before we actually step through the doors, we gotta discuss what constitutes a good museum. I might make this a recurring type of video, so I want to do a deep dive into what my ranking will look like this time so I can refer people back to this video down the line. Museums, believe it or not, don't really have a industry standard ranking system. There's nothing like a Michelin star or Academy Award for museums. There are a few metrics people track like visitor numbers, but popularity doesn't necessarily mean quality. There's also the World Museum Rankings, an organization that claims to do rigorous data collection and analysis to determine its ranking. But I have some issues with their system. While some of the metrics it judges are reasonable, like effectiveness, it also includes things like prestige and internationalization, which are metrics I feel are kinda difficult to quantify, especially in a video game setting. With that in mind, I decided it would be simpler to come up with my own grading system. Since the general population of people who are really excited to go to a museum is usually comprised of a bunch of studious geeks like myself, I figured I'd give them letter grades.
You've taken F to a new level. I'm going to give you a super F!
However, I don't think it would be fair just to give one judgment. Every museum, much like every student, has specific areas they might shine in, so I'll be breaking down my grading into individual subjects, and taking an average of their scores at the end to come up with a grade point average. If you have a 4.0 or higher, your museum is a near perfect experience in every way. If you're at a 0, you're basically a flaming crater in the ground with a sign next to it saying museum. With that in mind, let's look into our subjects. First, we have educational quality. When you think of it, museums only have 2 key objectives: keep and maintain important artifacts, and educate the public. Educational quality encompasses the latter. When I walk through a museum, I better learn something. Even if I already know the subject matter, any museum worth their salt better have clear and factual information presented. I should expect to see object labels next to artifacts telling me what I'm looking at and why it matters. If there is a staff available, they better be well informed or be able to point me in the direction of someone who is, should I have a question. You don't necessarily need to walk out of a museum as an expert on their subject matter, but you should walk out of there with some information.
I am the very model of a modern nature general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England and I quote the fights historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical.
Next, we have presentation. This should be somewhat self-evident, but a museum has to present its information in an interesting way. You can't simply put a bunch of information on the wall and call it a day. What's eye-catching about your museum? Do you have any interesting artifacts? Do you have interactables that I can get my grubby little paws on? Is it clear at a glance what each exhibit is about, or they arrange in an orderly fashion. All these are really important for a museum, and I should expect to see them answered in some way.
Yeah? What's the difference? Presentation!
Our next subject is scope. This is actually something I never thought about until I worked in the field, but you know that museums have limited resources and space? Crazy, I know, but it's true. That means that every artifact on display needs to have a purpose and should be directly related to the ultimate point of a museum. If you walk into a place that advertises itself as a natural history museum and you see a replica of an M4 Sherman tank, you know that museum has problems with scope. Or maybe there's an interesting connection that you never knew. One of the two. When I was working in a museum, the number one reason we turned down an artifact donation or even got rid of artifacts we already had was because they didn't fit the scope of the museum.
But what does that have to do with anything?
No. He's got a point.
Our final subject I call best practices. This is kind of a catch-all area that encompasses anything of note, either good or bad, that was not mentioned in the first three areas. Are there any skeletons in the closet? Do the artifacts on display seem to be properly sourced and properly protected? Do the employees seem like they care about the place? How does the public feel about the museum? While I likely won't be able to track visitor numbers, is anyone showing up at all? Do the people who do show up seem like they're having a good time? The best practice grade will help us to ensure that everything is on the up and up. With our grading system established, allow me to introduce today's subject, the Pewter Museum of Science. Located in the self-described stone gray city that is Pewter City, nestled in the foothills and mountains northwest of the Kanto region. Despite the somewhat bland-sounding description, Pewter City itself seems to be a beautiful, colorful, and well-put-together city. However, there are reports of thieves in nearby caves that threaten important natural wonders. Luckily, the Pewter Museum of Science exists to preserve these artifacts and educate the public on their importance. Let's go see what the museum has to offer. So here we are in scenic Pewter City. Despite the less than thrilling name, this wonderful little metropolis has exactly what we need. The Pewter Museum of Science. Without further ado, let's give the place a little tour. Alright, first things first, always chalked the man behind the counter, and he's asking for money. Now you may be wondering if I'm counting profitability into my statistics. No, I'm not. For starters, it's hard to figure out the business model of a museum. A lot of them will have private donors, and a lot of them will have ticket sales. It's not a fair metric to go off the ticker price, so I'm not really going to factor in. Plus, 50 of this world's currency, from what I understand, that's quite a low number. So right off the bat, we do have some wonderful looking artifacts. This main exhibit seems to be dedicated to natural science or natural history. Now, that's a great thing to see in a museum of science. You have some wonderful fossils. I mean, this one's amazing, perfectly preserved. A wonderful skeleton model, a fossil of the rare ancient Pokémon Kabutops. It's labeled. That's great. Not ideal. I hope there's more to it than just this one sign. I should be hearing more information. What did Kabutops eat? What did it do? When did it live? Where was this fossil found? A lot of things I'm not hearing right now. Wow, an ancient Pokemon. Oh, it's a replica. Yeah, we're in a museum. You don't bring wild animals into the museum. It's weird that this museum let me bring in an animal. I don't see any clear signage saying whether or not pets are allowed. In general, pets are not great for museums. Lots of hazards that can be found. You generally don't want to see them there, unless it's a service animal, of course. Now, the main thing I am noticing is a distinct lack of good descriptions and honestly anything on the walls. You don't need things on the walls necessarily, but there's not really a lot of reading material. There's some excellent artifacts, and with these cases, they're very well preserved. I'm very concerned about this one. I'm hoping that this is some sort of diorama more than it is actual artifacts, because this right here is not well protected. There should at least a rope. I mean, you have stanchions over here. Just wrap them around. This man wants to battle animals with me inside the museum. And museum staff does not seem to care. That is a red flag. Okay, up here. This month we're running a space exhibit. This is a good thing. Museums have to rotate exhibits. This tells us that the museum knows this, the Pewter Museum is aware of this, and they are keeping things within scope. They found a exhibit or designed it themselves to set up about space. That's a great thing. Also, plenty of wonderful looking things here. Some sort of, I assume, space rock. An object that fell on Mount Moon, thought to be a moonstone. That's great. Now we have factual information, what the scientists believe it to be, and where it's from. It's very great things to see. A 3D hologram that's a map of the universe? Is this interactable? What the heck? What sort of museum budget does this place have? A 3D hologram of the universe? That's incredible. Absolutely stunning display. I would like more information. Even a company logo so I can figure out how to buy one for myself. Okay, over here we have some wonderful more artifacts. We have a replica space shuttle. That's great. We have probably some more space rocks. Pieces of me. That's okay. We're also, again, struggling with the lack of any sort of detailed descriptions of artifacts. Also, this is a microscope. Is that an interactable? What's going on? So beautiful crystal when you look into the microscope. Okay, it is an interactable. I'm assuming some more detailed signage would help. But hey, looking through a microscope, great thing. Kids love to do that. Great way of bringing in some visitors. It seems to show the origins of the universe. It seems to, would also seem to me to denote that this is not a great representation because it does not have good charting, no well-defined labels. The Earth over here, is that supposed to be the Big Bang on this side? It's a good piece of wall decoration, something we haven't seen a lot of in this museum, but it also needs more information. Now here we do see a few things that are really nice. They have magazine racks. I'm assuming this is full of pamphlets, maybe tour guides of the museum, maybe it's details of other things around town. It's generally good information. Anything that's conveying information is going to reflect better in the Pewter Museum scores. So now that we've taken a gander at the exhibits, let's go around and talk to some people. Some of them are likely museum docents or tour guides. Some of them are also likely guests. If we can determine if someone is museum staff and they are able to convey information to us, that will reflect better in their scores. It means they have both a potentially positive atmosphere for employees and also means they are doing better at educating, making up where their lack of text panels is holding them back. It's been decades since mankind stood on the moon, and now we're following the dream of standing on that faraway red planet. News about space makes me so excited. Okay, you're probably a visitor, old man, checking out the museum in spare time. Very common, especially in smaller museums. You two seem to be visitors, you know, a man and child. Good afternoon at the museum, that's perfectly fine. So very interested in my pet, that's somewhat weird, but hey, museums attract all stripes. I think we can assume the child visitors are just visitors and not some sort of museum child labor. At least I don't want to assume they are. You are clearly an employee of the museum. You're telling me about the space exhibit. I assume you know more and I am just not able to ask you questions. I'm going to err on the side of you are a helpful member of museum staff. I should be grateful for my long life. Never did I think I would get to see the bones of a dragon. That, sir, I question your paleontological knowledge, which also means you're probably not a museum employee. You're talking about how great it is to see something like this, and you clearly have no idea what it is. Now, when I was poking around earlier, I happened to notice this offshoot here, and you know, we'll give them a free landscaping. I know I came in through the hedges, but worry not, I am perfectly licensed to be here. Don't worry, employees, it's fine. Don't worry about it, don't argue, I'm just gonna poke around. Absolutely, I can stick in the back, kid. The lab's for trying to resurrect creatures from amber, which contains the genetic material of ancient creatures. My friend, I believe you've been watching too many movies. Jurassic Park was a wonderful Steven Spielberg piece, but does not reflect scientific reality. The secrets of space, the mysteries of Earth, there are so many things about which we know so little, but that should spur us to study harder, not throw in the towel. You know what? That's a great attitude. Clearly you're a museum employee, though you're not seemingly to do any work, but I appreciate the attitude you have towards pursuits of information. That's what we're doing here at museums. That's what it's all about. We have 2 fossils of rare prehistoric Pokémon on exhibit. Yes. Yes, you do, and one of them's not properly protected. Stanchions, please, dude. So in a previous visit here, this man gave me an amber that's somewhat concerning. I do not know if proper deaccession paperwork was filed for a museum artifact. That's somewhat concerning that he would give it away to an unknown child, but without additional information, I have no way of knowing if this guy is on the up and up. I did still take the amber. I'm not going to turn down an awesome piece of artifact, but that's not going to reflect well on your score if you did not file the proper paperwork to deaccession that artifact. Even on a glass case for it, that's somewhat concerning. You normally, any museum's going to have plenty of display cases laying around in storage, but you're not generally having artifacts in them all the time when they're not on display, and then giving them away to mysterious children who came in through your hedges. Your deaccession process needs some work. Well, with that, I think the best thing, so you looked in the museum, let's at least bother to look around the outside of the city, see how the general public is feeling about their local purveyor of science and history. Do you think you'd keep an eye on my slowpoke so you can visit the museum? Listen, I'm always down to help someone understand science and history and attend their local museums, so I guess I can babysit this strange hippo creature. Thank you for keeping an eye on Slowpoke here. This is for your trouble. Hey! Listen, lady, if you're just gonna pay people in valuable items, I'm gonna need more information. Did you check out the museum already? Yes, sir, I have been. Display of those fossils found on Mount Moon was really something. Hey, it's great that you're telling me that the fossils were found on Mount Moon. They should be telling me more about that. So, that appears to be all the public has to say about the Museum of Science. I am going to now take my notes, tabulate the results, and I'll see you in just a moment with the final grade for the Pewter Museum of Science. It's grade time! I will be using this grade scale I found on Wikipedia to determine my more specific grade judgments. For educational quality, the Pewter Museum of Science receives a 75%, or a C. The museum has a lot of great artifacts, and the employees do seem knowledgeable and reliable. There's a lot of information on the Pokémon world that is contained at the museum, from detailed fossils to a 3D hologram of the universe. I still can't get over that. There's a lot to learn here, but ultimately it falls kinda short. Without detailed text panel explanations of these artifacts, I walked away with much less info than I really should have. Next, we have presentation, and I'm gonna have to give them a pretty strong A. More specifically, a 93%. They have some of the most amazing artifacts a museum could ask for. They're also arranged in a functional and orderly manner. The exhibits are split clearly, they aren't clustered together oddly. There's even stuff you can interact with, like microscopes, pamphlets, and a 3D map of the universe. Because again, that's pretty dope. It does have some small fails that keep it from being perfect, namely a lack of stanchions around a few important artifacts, which is just begging to get them ruined, and a lack of text panel displays to display information. Next up for scope, we actually have an A+, 100%. I wasn't expecting to give one of these out right away, but there was absolutely nothing that remotely blemishes the Pewter Museum's grade in this category. The only artifacts the Pewter Museum seems to have are directly related to its purview. It's a museum of science, and you've got fossils, which we also know are locally sourced from nearby Mount Moon, and the space exhibit. Whether it's brought in from outside or made from the museum's own collection, it's right in line with the museum's reported area of expertise. Finally, we have best practices. I decided to give the Pewter Museum of Science a B in this category, or an 84%. The museum is largely doing everything right. The artifacts all seem to be properly sourced, the museum is neat and orderly, the employees of the museum not only seem to be well informed, but actively interested in the mission of the museum. Even the public seems to be really interested in coming, and they're willing to pay a premium in precious jewels to get people just to pet sit for them so they can attend. Unfortunately, there are a few areas of somewhat serious concern. As we've stated, a lack of stanchions in certain key areas shows a dangerous gap in artifact safety. The other big issue is that someone at the museum is perfectly willing to give away artifacts, which I shouldn't need to tell you is a pretty big no-no. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that proper de-accession paperwork was filed before this employee was given the green light by his higher-ups to give away said artifact. But really, I should be signing something before he handed it over.
Wazowski, you didn't file your paperwork last night.
So let's plug our grades into our handy calculator. We're going to set everything to 3 credit hours, since 12 hours is the minimum for a full-time student. This all comes to a final grade point average of 3.325. With that sort of GPA, the Pewter Museum of Science could likely get into Indiana State University, which isn't too far from me. Overall, the Pewter Museum of Science is a very solid museum that shows a lot of promise. Given their current level of prestige and ability, I totally expect them to be able to push themselves to the best levels of museum quality in the next semester. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to push yourself to the best quality of entertainment on YouTube, well, I mean, there's a lot of other people you can subscribe to, but you can also subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Landon. This is Landon-Core. I'll see you in the next video.